Good evening from the University of Findlay and welcome to this County Commissioner Forum sponsored by the Courier, UFTV, 1330 WFIN and 88.3 WLFC. I'm WFIN News Director Doug Jenkins and I'll be serving as your moderator for tonight's event. Now tonight's forum is an opportunity for you to find out more about the candidates running for County Commissioner in Hancock County. I've selected the questions for this evening's forum and no one is aware of what they're going to be asked. The format for the forum consists of a 2-minute opening statement by each candidate, as well as a 2-minute closing statement at the end of our festivities. In between the statements, we'll ask a series of questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and each candidate will be given 1 minute for rebuttal, and another minute to rebut the rebuttal if they like. Because we have a lot of ground to cover, we'll move on after that. And if I believe a follow-up is necessary, the candidate might be asked that follow-up question, and they'll have 60 seconds to respond there. Our participants for this evening are Brian Robertson and John Harrington. So with that said, let's get started. We begin this evening with opening statements, and I believe, Mr. Robertson, you elected to go first with the opening statement.
Thank you, Doug, and thank the University of Findlay and WFN for hosting us this evening. First and foremost, I give God the glory, certainly on this Ash Wednesday. And as we start this Lenten season, I just want to stress that I'm very grateful for His guidance and protection. And I'm also grateful for the volunteers. There have been so many volunteers that have taken an earnest blue-collar business person like myself and help get them into public service. They know I work hard daily for Hancock County, the signature county of Ohio, like a world-class executive, and on behalf of you, the shareholders, which are the taxpayers of our great community. This is reflected in my work ethic, my attendance, and certainly my preparation. And while I serve on probably a dozen or more boards, as well as nonprofits throughout our community, none of which are more important than still teaching Sunday school for the past 19 years in terms of faith formation with our youth. You should also know that in my first term alone, approximately $100,000 has been returned to the general fund, and me not taking the health care benefits, paying my own travel expenses, which has included multiple trips to Washington, D.C. on flood mitigation, as well as Japan for economic development. In addition to that, I've bought my own office furniture and paid for most of my office supplies. I challenge you to find a public servant at the city, county, or state level willing to do the same. Please understand this is simply a reflection that I want to be in office to serve your best interest and not my best interest. Whether we have agreed or disagreed on issues, I think it's important to know I've always listened and learned from your input. And please keep in mind that our county and our country have a crisis. See, many run as Republicans. I just happen to be a practicing Republican. And the results have been clear that my words have matched my actions. Lower taxes, cutting wasteful spending like the Garage Mahal. In 2012, before I came in the office, the county borrowed $5 million. In 2013, our county auditor returned $1.89 million back to pay off the bond and the note because that money didn't get spent. And I've been honest and transparent regardless if we have a different viewpoint. In other words, I don't just share information with those that have the same opinion. So as you listen to tonight's forum, please understand that think about who would you trust to run your company, who would you trust with your paycheck. Thank you.
Mr. Harrington?
Thank you. My name is John Harrington, and I'm proud Republican, proud citizen of Hancock County, and I want to be your next Hancock County Commissioner. I want to work for quality of life, economic growth, job creation and retention, and a sustainable, affordable, realistic flood plan. I want to promote crime and drug prevention and ensure fiscal responsibility. I want to restore civility, integrity, and trust. I will restore the teamwork needed and eliminate the egotistical, attention-getting mentality of my opponent. This is an elected position, not a political one. I want to oust a member of the Wizard of Oz Frank Morgan gang accused of running unfair, unethical shenanigans during previous election campaigns. My opponent might deny being Frank Morgan, but he cannot deny being part of the group that was accused. I want to promote Hancock County's economic growth. I will never consider promoting another county's economic development over my own. Local means here, not elsewhere. A commissioner's job is to promote economic growth, and job retention. I would never consider moving my manufacturing facility to another county like my opponent did. I will work as a team with local schools, colleges, manufacturers, business leaders, and economic development officials to help develop a workforce development plan to attract, retain, and train quality candidates for local business and industry. And finally, I would work with our ag community to assure them that they have a voice in related decisions.
Before we get into tonight's question, a bit of a new element from tonight compared to Monday. When we hit the end of our 2 minutes or 1 minute for questioning, we do have a buzzer, if we could hear that, just for the people watching and listening at home. There you go. So if you hear that beep while you're watching or listening, that's what that is. I'll allow either candidate to wrap up their thought, and then we'll move on from there. With that said, let's get into the questioning, and we'll just start from the 100 miles up and then start to drill down. Mr. Harrington, first question will go to you. What's the biggest issue facing Hancock County right now, and why are you the person to address it?
Well, it's a no-brainer. It's the flood, right? We have to fix the flood. Whether it's a retention, whether it's a diversion, whether it's a levee, it doesn't matter. We have to fix it. The Corps of Engineers have come up with a plan that they feel is the plan that's economically feasible and will make the least impact on our not only our city, but also our community. Sure, some people are upset about it, but that's because their land is being taken for the retention plan. But once finished, I think that it'll be the best plan for Hancock County, and hopefully will be completed in a timely manner, and once completed will eliminate the devastation and catastrophes that we've had in the past.
Mr. Robertson, same question to you. Biggest issue in Hancock County?
Well, it is flood mitigation, but I'd like to tell you more about what I've done. In 2012, after winning the primary, I met with the Army Corps and Mr. Mike Paninsky and Steve Wilson, and I wanted to stress 3 things. First and foremost, they were going to go through 44 property lines. That is now down to 7, because 44 property lines being intersected would hurt ag business, and none of us would like that in my manufacturing facility if I had to drive around a diversion channel. And they've done a good job of correcting and addressing that. On that particular concern, I also followed up again in 2013. But the other thing I stressed in 2012 is that we need to be transparent, and we needed to start hitting timeline targets, something the Army Corps to this day has struggled with. But in 2013, I also went to Buffalo to look at the array of engineering, where we looked at ore and run as a viable option, which the ag community had wanted 5 years ago. Unfortunately, it was something the community didn't get behind, but we certainly held a press conference. It was something that we thought would be a bridge to a compromise, and something that I really worked for and pushed for. Obviously, also before coming in office, I went down and benchmarked the Miami Conservancy District down in Dayton. Just recently, Tony Iritti and Steve Wilson have also looked at going down there and maybe benchmarking that in the near future. I also traveled to Washington, D.C. in May when the project was dead and off life support, which I communicated about a week before the Corps announced it in April of 2013. Because we had no revenue coming in 2012, the project wasn't eligible for funding. And when that problem arose, no other politician wanted to go to Washington. And I went to Washington on my own dime to help address that with Tony Iritti when he couldn't find another politician that would travel with him. I've continued to be diligent in the Corps, and I've also complained when the Corps hasn't been transparent in their communication with the community.
All right. A minute for rebuttal if you'd like.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I would say is that the Corps of Engineers people are frustrated with the timeline that's gone through and some of the costs that we've run into. But the one thing that I think not only the commissioners, the city of Findlay, and other officials, including Putnam County, have to be is patient. You know, the Corps, unfortunately, is one of those government agencies that's not used to working on real time that we should expect. But, you know, they're the experts. We have to allow them to go through the process to prove to us as citizens that it's the best plan for our community, not only the county, but the city, to prevent future catastrophes. You know, what we cannot afford is a flood that shuts down Marathon Oil or Marathon Petroleum, shuts down I-75, and does the devastation that the floods did in the past.
All right, and a minute for to rebut the rebuttal if you'd like.
Certainly. I think, you know, John maybe has lower expectations than I do, because I expect this to be a vendor supply chain relationship. And we have deadlines. The deadlines need to be met, and we need to have honest and open dialogue with the Army Corps. We're disappointed in those deadlines being met. And that's just a simple perspective. But in the meantime, in 2013, I asked for $1 million to clean the river. I've also pushed for multiple ditch projects to get off the shelves. They've sit around for 10 to 20 years. We now have ditch projects moving forward. Dawsell Ditch coming up in 2016, which was killed after $100,000 was spent because the prior board folded on cleaning it. We've now done a $400,000 project on cleaning the river. We have a $1 million project that just started this past Monday. So we're getting back to the $1.2 million that we originally talked about on your radio show back in August of 2013, Mr. Jenkins. So again, you have to be patient, but you have to be persistent that we need to do the things we need to do, and the preventive maintenance on the watershed helps to moderate flooding today while we wait on the Army Corps project, which is still probably a decade away.
All right. Let's stay with flood mitigation, and obviously it sounds like both of you are in favor of staying the course. This has been presented by many as a county versus city type of issue. Do you feel that's a fair characterization, and do you feel that county residents who have been a bit more vocal in opposition have adequate representation on this issue? Mr. Robertson, we'll start with you.
Well, I think it's a legitimate concern. You know, I was in the, quote, secret meeting at City Hall when 30-something members of the ag community had Bob Latta cornered. And I sat in that room, and we had private sector people in the room, separate from elected officials. And the question was, well, we don't want to let the ag community in. And I was the one that sat in the room and said, listen, we have private sector people in this room. If we have those private sector people in this room, we should also have ag representatives. So 2 people were allowed to come in the room. After that, I met with Tony Iridy, the mayor, talked with the private sector in terms of the former Flood Mitigation Partnership folks, and said we need to reach out and ask for a couple of spokespeople to be on behalf of the ag community. At that time, it was agreed that that was a good idea. I actually went out to Mr. Oman's farm, and they designated 2 representatives, and former Commissioner Bill Reckert and former Commissioner Steve Oman. So I think I've tried to recognize that we do have a concern about transparency, which I talked to the Army Corps back in 2012 in March when I met with Mike Peninsky, and continue to push the fact that it's okay that we have differences of opinions. It's okay that we have disagreements, but we've got to be able to sit down and have honest and open dialogue regardless of our differences. And that gets back to my opening comments. You can't just have a dialogue and share information with only people that agree with you. You have to share the same information with people with different viewpoints. And you've got to have a sense of confidence in self that says it's okay that we have differences. I have differences in business every day, certainly with employees, with other people in management leadership, and even with customers. But you've got to have that dialogue and that communication. It's critical.
Mr. Harrington, 2 minutes.
You know, to simplify it, it's the greatest impact of the flood was done to downtown Findlay in that corridor, but the greatest impact on what's proposed to correct the flooding problem is going to be on the ag community. You know, to put a diversion channel through ag territory, through farms, through residents, you know, on the west side of town, it's certainly affecting the ag community far more than it is the city. But the economic impact on the city was so great, in the millions and millions of dollars, let alone the ancillary impact for companies that maybe were looking to come, maybe open a retail establishment in the downtown area in a vacant building or a storefront. Maybe relocating a company here and having their employees be relocated here, but fearing the fact that maybe they can't get to work because of a flood issue. You know, it's an economic impact. So the benefit is going to be towards the city, but I always would look at this as the city is in the county's not in the city. So that has to be realized that we're all one community as a county. Right? It is the city of Findlay, no different than it is the village of Macomb, the village of Arlington, the village of Mount Corey, or anything else. So it has to be a partnership between both to solve a major problem. And the ag community will benefit because the community of Findlay will be repaired and hopefully not devastated again.
Mr. Robertson, a minute for rebuttal if you'd like.
Well, again, I just want to stress that when I was in Buffalo with Paul Smeltzer and Steve Wilson and we were looking at the engineering arrays, I went back about 45 minutes after we covered Ore and Run and said, we really need to look at Ore and Run. And I've never revealed this number, but I calculated the mitigation, the environmental mitigation cost for that, and it was a little over $12 million. And sitting there, we all agreed that even though it may not be the plan the Army Corps prefer, it was worth going back and trying to revisit it because we had about a 6-month window there within the community. Unfortunately, at that time, the ag community felt the project was dead because of funding. And at the same time, I think the ag community, from the feedback to me, made a conscious decision. Well, even though that's the plan that we thought would make sense back when it was discussed at Weinbrenner in 2011 with Senator Height and Representative Sprague and Lynn Watchman, they really said it wasn't fair to move the diversion channel from the Army Corps plan to Ore and Run, because it still was going to impact others in the ag community. So the ag community felt that it wasn't something worth pursuing. But at least I took the initiative to try to find a compromise, because that compromise is worth 100 years of collaboration between the city and the county.
Okay, and a minute for rebuttal as well, Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, you know, again, because my position wasn't that I would have been invited to those meetings. I'm sure if I was invited, I would have been there and maybe had a different perspective than my opponent. You know, if you look at a map of Ore and Run, it does have maybe some strategic advantages for that area. But again, the Corps of Engineers, they're the experts. They're Corps engineers. They're not Corps commissioners. They're not Corps city councilmen. They're Corps engineers. They are the experts that figure these things out, and you have to trust that their education and their expertise is going to do what's right. So.
Okay. We'll go with one more question on flood mitigation, then we'll move on to other subjects. But certainly that's probably what a lot of the people listening and watching are here to tune in for. So let's talk about cleaning and dredging of the river. That's been something that's been talked about, especially in the ag community. The Army Corps has said it probably would have very little impact. Do you think, though, it is worth revisiting, as the Army Corps has said that they would at least be willing to revisit? How effective do you think it could be? And we'll start with you, Mr. Harrington.
You know, the proposals I've seen, it can be done, right? I think there is maybe some people are saying that it can't be done. It can be done, but at what cost? And not only economically, but it also is going to take a high cost on the downtown area, because the way that it's proposed that they would come through the city of Findlay would be high levee walls, maybe even a floodgate at the Main Street and Corey Street bridges. It just wouldn't be aesthetic, right? No matter whatever. It also comes with a environmental impact that the EPA, even though sometimes we can't agree with them, but we have to agree with them. They are a federal agency that have rules and regulations that, if not followed, can affect a lot of people's lives, including economically. So you have to look at those two things. That's what the Corps looks at, right? That's why they propose the plan that they have, is they look at all of those options and come up with the one that's most economically feasible, with the less impact on the environment, and with little, if any, impact on the environment, and be aesthetically pleasing to most, not to all, but to most. And I think that's what they've come. If it can be economically feasible, I'm ready, willing, and able to listen to them, right? But everything I've seen and heard and studied, at this point in time, it's not. So.
Mr. Robertson, on cleaning the river?
Yes. I had private sector people come in conjunction with our soil and water department to talk about the river cleaning project back in 2013. Again, that was an interview we did with you. So it can be done. It is feasible. You have to mitigate the environmental aspects of it. We actually have a project. It's a joint project between the city and county now, with the Blanchard River Water Partnership being led by Phil Martin and coordinated by Phil Martin, where we're going to actually remove the sediments over in the recreational area by Riverside Park. And that's an example of it getting done, and getting done in a collaborative effort. But the reality in terms of dredging the whole river is a cost benefit the community has to decide. In terms of cleaning the river, it really is a local decision. We have X amount of funds available. We have the scope of the final project of the Army Corps projects at $60.5 million. So we have to determine where is those dollars best spent for the best return on investment for an actual result. So if you look at the initial river cleaning, which was $400,000 done in 2014-2015, that was a start. And I remember being asked by you, are you disappointed you didn't get the $1.2 million on your radio station, Doug? And I said, no, it's a start. And in business, it's about small Kaizen, small continuous improvement steps. And so we took a step, and now we've come back and done a phase 2, and we're taking another step. And that's what we have to keep doing as a community, is keep working and taking steps forward. It is never going to be perfect. It is never going to be a perfect solution, but we have to continue to take incremental steps. I think most people can now see the floodway through downtown Findlay, that the commissioners over the last few years have actually spent money not on fringe properties and random properties that help somebody they know. They've spent money, and we've spent money on the actual waterway. So you've got a better flowing access area for water to move along the banks. And you especially see that from Riverside Park through downtown.
All right. Mr. Harrington, a minute for rebuttal.
Yeah, real quick, you know, the removal of the houses and some of the downtown buildings that are in the floodway, that's a no-brainer. I mean, it was, you know, that money was earmarked for that. You know, I don't know where the friends and family thing would come from. I don't have any friends or family that live along that area, and certainly wouldn't make that claim. You know, there's still some that can and should be purchased and tore down. There's probably some other things that could be done in that area. And I also think that the cleaning and clearing of the rivers and the creeks and the ditches can't be anything but a good thing, because a free-flowing river or creek is a good thing. The idea is not only do you do it once, but you also maintain them over the years, because if not, it's just going to get back and have the same problem. So.
Mr. Robertson, a minute for rebuttal as well.
Well, I think it's important to understand that these, what I call preventive maintenance program for our watershed, set for 10 to 20 years. We hadn't cleaned the river in 20 years. Ditches is set for, projects are set for 10 to 20 years. And the reason they set is because elected officials, when they start cleaning these waterways, have to assess property owners. When you assess property owners, sometimes property owners come to the board and say, well, I don't want to pay the assessments, so your next election cycle, you know, there could be a consequence. So, you know, I think the community has to understand that we're now moving those projects forward. I think the ag community understands the importance of ditch maintenance, but I think on the urban side, with Dawsell Ditch, for example, that our urban community is now understanding the importance of paying those assessments, where they fought those assessments just a few years back on Dawsell Ditch, which is now a project that we're going to get done. And I think the Courier quoted me as saying, Commissioner Roberts says it's time to clean Dawsell Ditch. So it's another project that I kind of tried to bring to the forefront.
All right. We will move on now to some other topics, looking more towards the budget. In terms of taxation, the current 0.5% sales tax that's been collected since 2009 is set to expire within this next 4-year term. Now, what are your thoughts on allowing it to expire or conversely continuing it? Mr. Robertson, we'll start with you.
Well, when I went to Washington in May of 2013, you know, I had a conversation about how I had went and benchmarked the Miami Conservancy District, and also expressed that I would not anticipate federal funding being a high probability. And that doesn't mean that I don't want federal funding. It doesn't mean that I'm against federal funding. It doesn't mean that I'm against the Army Corps project. What it means is I'm a businessman. And you have, in business, contingency plans. And so the contingency plan for me from day one is that we have to have a good partnership between our urban and rural communities on flood mitigation, because there is going to come a line in the sand when we may have to renew the sales tax. And to renew that sales tax, we need a majority of the voters to support that renewal. And that's why I have been very vocal that we have to engage, involve, and respect some of the wants and needs of the rural community as well. And I've tried to be a person that has balanced that. Now, I've been criticized at times for that, because people have said, oh, he's not for flood mitigation. You know, I entered politics because my home was flooded not once, but twice. So people have to understand that it was an issue that drew me into politics. But I also believe in getting results. And in terms of getting results, you have to look at the actual situation, look at a timeline, which again was something I helped develop when we fell behind. In 2013, we brought the Corps back in August of 2013 to try to figure out how to get it back on schedule. And so I think an example of this would be, we had a meeting with the Corps went out to dinner, I worked at 2 o'clock in the morning and made a Gantt chart and a timeline on how to catch the project up. That's the kind of work ethic I bring to the community, and that's the kind of business approach I bring to the community. And most people don't know about those things going on or getting done behind the scenes.
Mr. Harrington, on the sales tax?
Well, there's two sides to the sales tax. You know, he talks about the flood mitigation side. That's a 0.25%, right? And the other 0.25% goes to the general fund. Certainly the 0.25% is designed to create a fund, right? A piggy bank per se. So when the project is presented to us, we have money set aside to go forward with the project. Now, if by chance the federal government would decide that they're not going to fund our flood mitigation project, I think that would be a grave mistake for a couple reasons. One, you have the Midwest Marathon Petroleum that controls the Midwest pipelines, which are strategically important. Certainly the pipelines themselves can be flooded and probably have no impact on the nation, but the employees that need to get into Marathon Petroleum to run those pipelines need to be able to do so. Second is that I-75 is so critically important to commerce in America, let alone the Midwest, let alone Ohio. It's not just toys and electronics going up and down I-75 all day long. It's our highest traffic count in the area, right? And the fuel that's needed, the heating oil that's needed, the steel that's needed for manufacturing, and the parts and everything that fuels our economy are going up and down I-75. And when that shuts down for 4 or 5 days at a time, that makes a huge impact on the nation's economy. And I think that has to be considered. Second is the general fund needs the revenues that 0.25% generates. But if the citizens decide that that's not needed, I think we can look at an alternative to that. But I think the 0.25% is important for the flood.
Rebuttal, Mr. Robertson?
Yes, I think this election is about words versus actions. So those are good words, but those are the words that I actually went to Washington, D.C. and shared that were in an article by the Courier, where I took Marathon off the table because we had another congressman that works in another district here in Ohio that is very important in terms of being a key member on a committee in Washington. And he was an ag gentleman who was not maybe in favor of helping us out or getting our project racked a little higher in terms of the Army Corps. But I made the point that Marathon will, and it has become, for example, the largest company in Ohio related to cells. But the largest employer in Ohio is Honda and its supply chain. And those parts have to be moved, and those employees have to be at work. And that's where the I-75, from an interstate commerce standpoint, is so critical, not only to the largest employer in Honda, but also just to the interstate commerce that also runs between Detroit and Toyota, which is headquartered in Erlanger, Kentucky, which is another large employer in the region.
Mr. Harrington, a minute for rebuttal as well.
Yeah, back to words versus actions, if elected as a commissioner, obviously the actions can happen with me. I have to let people know, the citizens that are considering voting for me, that, hey, if elected, those actions will come from me. You've had the opportunity to do those things because you're the current commissioner and have been for 4 years. I think those things should be expected from you, and I applaud you for doing what you've done. It's not that the person who replaces you won't do them, right? The person that is going to replace you will do those along with the other commissioners.
All right, we'll do one more question and then we'll get to our break here as we're about halfway through. You guys have both talked about words, so I guess we'll talk about words now, specifically campaign literature. So the question will be framed a little bit different for each of you just based on campaign things. So first question for you would be for you, Mr. Harrington, and some of your literature you've said, I will walk the walk to bring prosperity, safety, health, recreation to Hancock County residents. What does walking the walk mean to you in this context?
Well, by walking the walk, it's just like you said, action is what's necessary. Walk the walk, that's being in the office, that's going to all the meetings, that's attending the village council meetings, that's attending the township meetings, that's walking the walk. That's not just talking about it, that's actually going out there and doing it, right? If there is a meeting in Washington that the commissioners need to attend, I have no problem in attending it. I have no problem spending my own money to attend it also, right? I don't think that that's they fly there every day, right? And I have friends I can stay with when I get there, right? If that meeting's important enough, I'll make sure I get there, right? If that meeting's in Columbus, I'll make sure I get there. If that meeting's in the region, I'll make sure I get there, right? So I think the idea is talk is cheap. Actually, actions are exactly what's needed. So.
All right. Because this is set up a little bit different, yeah, I'm audibling like Peyton Manning. I'm not going to yell Omaha, but we'll a lot of times, I think, actually. I'll give you a minute to rebut that, then we'll come back to you on campaign state from you. You'll have 2 minutes to explain, and then you'll have a minute for rebuttal on that. So if you'd like to go for a 1 minute rebuttal here.
Well, in John's current position, he didn't make half the department budget meetings. In his current position, there was a subcommittee meeting to talk about Mr. Lano's payout regarding sick pay, to rework the language. He showed up to the meeting. He said, this isn't worth my time, and he left, which meant that subcommittee couldn't report back to council as a whole. Those are words versus actions. My actions have been that when other politicians didn't want to go to Washington, D.C., or didn't want to show up for an Army Corps update in November of 2014, even though the newspaper said they were going to show up for the meeting because they had been in the loop, I went down and showed up. And I remember Kate Winslet leaving me a note, who was at the end of the diversion channel, and she was very upset, obviously, over the plan that was announced back in 2014. But she left a note on my desk and said, thank you for having basically the guts or the courage to come down and at least face your constituents. I respect that.
All right. I'm guessing guts wasn't the word used. I'm going to feel like 1 minute for rebuttal is warranted.
Yeah,
here,
real
so.
quick, you mentioned Lanyo. That meeting was rehashing already decided issues, and the one council person just kept hashing. When the city attorney was sitting there, basically telling that person or her that she was wrong, and she just wasn't going to take no for an answer, and just kept droning on and on and on about it. It was obviously a meeting that was going nowhere, and so I stood up and said, this is a waste of my time, and left. I think anybody else would have under the same circumstances, and I certainly shouldn't be criticized for it. That issue was decided. It was decided both by state ordinance and decided by our city's attorney. It wasn't exactly what everybody wanted, but it was a compromise. Neither party got exactly what they wanted, but sometimes in sales that's what happens. But it's been decided, and it's water over the dam, and so it needs to be moved on.
Okay. Campaign literature, Mr. Robertson. Your quote from some of your literature says, I've proven that the power of ideas, economic spirit, and sound financial decision can change the status quo in Hancock County politics. Can you give an example of this?
Certainly. I've been someone who has stood up to keep low taxes. We have the 57th lowest income tax out of 857 municipalities. We also have the fifth lowest sales tax out of the 88 counties as well. And then in terms of looking at ideas, there was an elephant in the room before I came into office called a garage mahal. And some people will campaign and say, if you elect me, I'll get this done. Well, I got elected. I spent 100 hours working to re-engineer that garage, worked with the engineer's office and our architects to then return almost $1.9 million back, or have the auditor, return that back to pay down the note. So we're not paying interest on that. And I remember Charity looking at me and saying, are you sure you're going to get this garage down to $3.1 million left? Because once I return this money, we can't get it back. And I said, I'm sure. And we delivered, $200,000 in their budget. I also said, that I would basically take action and be involved on flood mitigation. And I've done that. Again, I've paid for multiple trips to Washington, D.C. to have the discussion and also sat through a lot of tough meetings where I didn't make the choice to just say, well, I'm frustrated and I'm going to walk out. Because as a 10-time Ironman finisher, it's about finishing. It's not about running the perfect race. You'll never have necessarily a perfect race. You'll have very few in your lifetime. But you got to realize it's about relentless forward progress. And I think in 3 years that I've been in office, I've directly taken actions that have saved $2.5 million. The Dornay buildings, that'd be another hole in downtown Findlay, would not be there if I had not shown the courage to say that those buildings need to be sold back to the private sector. But not through a sealed envelope, but through an arm's length transaction and an open auction, which was a unique approach. But that way it made it fair and transparent that there was no sweetheart deals being done when that property was sold. And it was sold for $3,000 more than the auditor's appraised value, which is a good business deal for the taxpayers, by the way.
All right, minute for rebuttal.
Yeah, again, talk about buildings, right? You know, when you ran for this office, you gave Ed Ingold quite a bit of guff about 512 South Main and the amount that was paid for that, and waste of money that it was in the wrong location. But last time I looked, that's where the commissioner's offices are. So I guess that must have changed after you were elected. You know, the problem with downtown buildings is there's only so many of them, right? There's only so many of them that aren't in the floodway, and there's only so many of them that are close to where the rest of the government offices are, and sometimes those either need to be bought, and some of them need to be torn down, and some of them need to be renovated. But I think it's important that there's a plan that has strategic development at the core of it, and you can see a light at the end of the tunnel, or it has to be reworked accordingly. So
I feel like a minute for rebuttal warranted, and then we'll go to our break.
Yeah, just first and foremost, the address is actually 514 South Main Street. And that building was bought to house the prosecutor's office, probate and juvenile, as well as the commissioners. And that decision was made before I came in the office, and that piece of infrastructure was bought before I came in the office. So there was no choice in terms of turning back and doing another option. But what I will tell you is that we renovated that building at a very, very effective cost. It is now a good functioning building. Adult probation was on Main Street. It's now off of Main Street, and I know that's created a little bit of frustration for a local merchant. But again, that area that is being housed that is maybe causing a point of frustration for that local merchant is not the commissioners, or under the commissioners' authority. That is a separate elected official. And then, you know, relating to sorry, we keep getting these little sign flashes. It could be further away to the audience at home. It could be further away from where I'm sitting to see it. Anyway, I'm fine with that. I think I've made my point, so thank you.
All right. Well, I've been audibling like Peyton Manning, but managing the clock like Andy Reid. We are woefully behind for our half-hour break. We'll take a break now. Back in 3 minutes, a couple more questions and closing statements. Stay tuned.
To find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But you probably won't. You're busy. Kids, work, show coming back in 48 seconds. So let's do this now. Hold up one finger if you're a man, women, 0. 3 more fingers if you're over 60, 2 over 50, 1 over 40. If you're not sure, keep in mind you're sitting on a couch right now, so 1 more finger if you're not very active. 1 finger if yes, 0 if no. 1 yes, 0 no. Next, find the body type that looks most like you and hold up that many fingers while I look around awkwardly. And that's it. If you're holding up 5 fingers or more, you probably have prediabetes. Sorry to be so blunt, but hey, you're busy. Just go to the site.
Hey, look, it's those guys. Are you good to drive?
I'm fine.
How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be.
Go and step out of the vehicle for me.
See ya, buddy. Good luck. So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
There's one thing you can never have sex without.
It's not something you buy.
Or something you take.
In fact, there's only one way to get it.
It has to be given to you, freely.
It's consent.
Because sex without it isn't sex.
It's rape. Consent.
If you don't get it, you don't get it. It's on us to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
So they say it's a man's world? Well, I don't see anybody's name on it. While they were out doing their thing, we slowly changed all that. We changed all that. today, women can do anything men can do. And there's one thing we're even better at.
And welcome back to the University of Findlay as we continue our Hancock County Commissioner Forum. I'm WFIN News Director Doug Jenkins. We have time for a couple of more questions for our candidates before we wrap up this evening's festivities. And so we will continue on. And you'll have to excuse me, I forget who was supposed to go next. I believe Mr. Robertson, you have the first question here coming out. A lot's been made over the past few years over the cooperation between city and county. Do you feel that this is important? Why? And maybe explain your position on that.
Well, I think, you know, there's been a lot of, I guess, good cooperation. A lot of good work has gotten done. Whether it's, you know, I just referenced the cleaning of the recreational water area there behind Riverside Park. Whether we look at some of the projects we've done in terms of revolving loan fund projects within the community, and some of the contracts we've done that are joint contracts. I mean, right now we are reaching out to the city to look at a joint contract on the security and the entrance between probate court, the courthouse, as well as City Hall, which was something that Paul Smeltzer had pushed for and worked and asked about and inquired about. And we just had a meeting on that Tuesday to where we're looking at moving that forward and putting in a consulting contract and seeing if the city wants to participate in that. So I think, you know, from the standpoint of the community moving forward, you can't ask for more cooperation. Look at the Hancock Marathon Performing Arts Center. The schools sold it for $1 to the Port Authority. The city took care of the paving in the parking lot. And then the Hancock County Commissioners, thanks to some good work from the state, from Senator Cliff Height, approved the additional bed tax, which is now, and we just signed the memorandum of understandings for both of these, which is now going to help provide money for the capital in and around the Marathon Performing Arts Center, which is an existing piece of infrastructure. It's a beautiful crown jewel in our community, along with a future piece of infrastructure that's going to take place in the youth center for the Hancock County Fair Board. So again, that's a couple of examples of really good collaboration that is creating significant infrastructure for our community. There'll be 50 to 100-year buildings for our youth to enjoy on the rural and urban side, as well as for the community as a whole to enjoy in the Performing Arts Center. So,
Mr. Harrington.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the health department merger. You know, that what a great example of the city and the county working together, even though it's taken maybe longer than some people thought it should. But you know, there were lots of logistics and to be worked out, but it certainly made sense to take a city and the county health department and merge them, not only for fiscal reasons, but it just makes sense that the citizens of the county and the citizens of the city have one location that they can go and get the health services that they provide. Again, you know, that was probably one of the best examples lately. One of the things my opponent, I noticed that he's always mentions Paul Schmelzer. The one person he never mentions is the mayor. It's readily apparent that the two of them don't get along. They ran against each other in a previous election, and I think that's sad. Our mayor has a lot to offer. She has lots of good ideas. Although Paul is the service safety director and basically runs the day-to-day operations, she's the one that goes out and promotes Findlay and has the ideas not only to keep Findlay a vibrant community, but I think with some cooperation from the county, if a project would pop up that maybe doesn't fit the city, that maybe it would be a good fit for the county. So I think it's important to get along with her also. There are other things, you know, there are some things that I'd like to see. I'd like to see maybe more cooperation between the sheriff and the Findlay Police Department. I think there are some things that they're cooperating whole-handedly, but I think there's some other things that, you know, that heaven forbid there be a police chase through the city that ends up in the county. Those people need to be able to communicate with each other. And same thing with any kind of rural fires, city fires, that there are certainly incidences where the township have come in and helped the city, and the city's gone out and helped the township. So.
Mr. Robertson, a minute for rebuttal.
Well, certainly the health department is a big deal, and it's something that I said back in the mayor forum would happen because the state changed the law, and so by 2018, if you didn't have an accredited board, you were going to have to fall under another board. And I've always said that Findlay and Hancock County, we decide our own destiny. And we did that by having our DAC and our local township, village mayors, et cetera, come together and get this deal done between our rural leadership, our county, and our city. And then regarding the mayor, I'm an operations guy, Paul's an operations guy, so I did not mean any disrespect. But I think Mr. Harrington needs to know that when the mayor won the general election, she had a mutual friend reach out to me. She came to my house, my wife made her snacks, and asked for my help in both her transition and coming into office and establishing a committee to decide her staff. And I was very gracious and helped her and gave her my best advice going forward. So I think that you need to understand the actual words and actions of myself, and I think my actions were very, very benevolent to the mayor, and I meant no disrespect. I had just been dealing with Paul Smeltzer.
1 minute for rebuttal as well.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I haven't really. You know, I spent a lot of time up with the city. That's currently my current position, you know, so we spend a lot of time talking about things, and unfortunately that's not something that's ever been discovered by me. You know, I think it's real important, right, that the commissioners work with the city. No different than they work with the townships, no different than they work for the villages. I go back to the city is in the county. Even though it is a lot larger budget, lot larger animal, they need to work together. And I think that's real important. And I think the commissioners need to be in some collaboration meetings, no different than the city needs to be in some collaboration meetings with the county. So.
Okay, I believe we have time for one more question. We'll focus on current events. In 2015, the commissioners passed a 3% increase in the bed tax to raise money that can be used by the Marathon Center for the Performing Arts as well as the fairgrounds. Do you believe this was the right move, and why or why not? Mr. Harrington, we'll start with you.
I don't like taxes at all. Who does? I mean, I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. You know, taxes, you know, but you know, that's one of the most fair taxes. One, it only impacts a certain aspect of the consumers, you know, the people who come and stay here. It's kind of like a sales tax. You know, if you consume and you're charged a sales tax, it's somewhat like a use tax. So I think if there are taxes, I think that's the most fair tax. Not that I like any taxes, I'll say that again, right? But you have to look at where it's going towards. The Marathon Performing Arts Center is one beautiful building. It was long overdue for this community. A lot of private citizens stepped up and made a financial commitment towards that. The Community Foundation made a great financial commitment to that. But what they lacked was a foundation to continue their operations through time, because no matter what it took to build it, if it's no good if it can't be funded properly and continue. You know, what you don't want is a big white elephant a few years from now because of a lack of funding. So what a great idea. I like Cliff Height that came up with it. I know Marathon worked a little bit. Obviously they worked with the commissioner's office to pass it. What a great idea. Also, the fair is a great part of the county. You know, all the kids come in, and anything they can do to help that is a great idea also.
Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, when this was dropped off, we actually didn't know the legislation was coming. I think we talked about that on the radio as well. I think I did with Chris Oakes. But the reality was, here's 3%. You guys got to decide what to do with it. So the commissioners were actually put in a tough spot. I was asked to handle kind of the public relations side of it and did the interviews with Chris Oakes, which were certainly in the paper. Phil Regal, who is also a practicing attorney, handled the legwork in between a Marathon, because there was a little bit of a language issue in terms of how the state narrowed the language towards capital and infrastructure and maintenance versus operations. And so that created a little bit of a challenge, but that has been worked through. But also looking at that 3%, you know, how do we use that in the community? And the ideal was, if we're going to do something for the urban community, we have to also do something for the rural community. And so that's where the 2-1 split was done, is kind of do something mutually beneficial. Because Hancock County is the body and Findlay's the heart of our community. I've always said that. But you also have to make sure that you're keeping both the body and the heart healthy and kind of working in one. In terms of the tax itself, it's a usage tax. It primarily impacts those that don't live and reside in our community. There was some concern expressed by the hotel owners. But when I talked to various boards and members of the community, the overwhelming feedback I got is this can't be forever. It can't be permanent. And I've stressed that, you know, and it's nice we put a 7-year window on the renewal, but I've stressed that 7 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, our community is going to have a different need. One of those needs is going to be an actual joint health department facility in terms of infrastructure. Right now they're housed in 2 different locations. The county's still out in 140, and we're still leasing space out off of Tiffin Avenue. So we have to think long term about when this ends in 7 years, would that money be available to help create the infrastructure around the health department or some other community need? And that's where I look at things from a long-term planning standpoint as a business person.
Okay. A minute for rebuttal if you'd like, Mr. Harrington.
The only thing I'd like to say, that was the first time I've heard you mention one of the other commissioners. That was a good thing. You know, it does take 2/3 of a vote to pass everything. It's not about one person. It should be about all 3. You know, and I think that's important to mention. Second is you know, again, I agree with the county is important, and that money should be earmarked. A portion should be earmarked to county project. Why not the fairgrounds? That, you know, the fair needs funding. They're always struggling, and I think they appreciated what you did for them. So.
And 1 minute for rebuttal as well, Mr. Robertson.
Well, you notice tonight, in terms of words and actions, my opponent several times has taken shots, I think, that are unnecessary. I tend to always be respectful, I always be professional, but I tend to be on point and on task. I don't think those shots are necessary. You know, this week I've been called in the article Monday a lone wolf. I've been called a ringleader. Tonight I've been called arrogant. I don't think any of that's necessary. It's not what I teach my kids in Sunday school. What I teach them is to turn the other cheek. And I've tried to be graceful in turning the other cheek against personal attacks. Getting back to you know, the bed tax in and of itself, again, I did my best to help facilitate it. I received a call from Mr. Ed Reading as well as Tom Warren from the Hancock County Fairgrounds, was just in the office the other day. They're very, very appreciative of how this was handled, and it was handled in a good collaborative effort, and ultimately has given a good result for the long-term assistance to sustain over the next 7 years both of these projects. So, thank you.
All right. We are at the end of our question and answer period. Each candidate will now have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Mr. Harrington on the coin toss elected to go last on the closing statement. So first closing statement goes to Mr. Robertson. And you have 2 minutes.
Understand. I'll yield some time to find in my closing comments. I believe voters will send a message that you value a candidate that is both caring and competent, working for the best interests, not more candidates that are going to go along to get along, to collect paychecks and benefits for their own interest. As a private citizen and public steward, I am committed to 3 principles that I shared with the Hancock County leadership senior members the month I came into office. And I'm about people, not politics, ideas, not ideology, and a balanced budget versus bureaucracy. I have enjoyed having the opportunity to discuss the results of these 3 guiding principles this evening. Simply put, I'm not interested in serving the party, the politics, or the power. I'm interested in serving the people. You are my first priority, you are my second priority, and you are my third priority. This has confused some in the establishment, but not the majority of people who know me or have been kind enough to get to know me, and I'm grateful for that. Please be assured I will win this election regardless of the results. If reelected, it means Hancock County values a return to business-minded leadership for the community's best interest, not individual political interest. And if not, I will have won by entering the arena, fighting the good fight, getting good results in a very short period of time, while having more time with my family and friends, which I have sacrificed greatly in service to you. I have given you my best, and I am prayerful that you will give me yours as we approach Election Day. Thank you, and God bless you.
And Mr. Harrington.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank the University of Findlay, Findlay Publishing, and you for moderating. You know, I grew up on Eagle Creek next to the Boy Scout camp. I've seen floods, I've been in floods, and I hate floods. We need to fix the flooding, we need to fix it right, and we need to fix it now. I've also enjoyed the prosperity and joy of living and raising my family in a conservative, faith-based community. I want to bring back the teamwork needed to help Hancock County prosper. I will repair the divide my opponent has caused. I have found that Hancock County doesn't suffer long for charlatans. My opponent brags about his business prowess and the worldwide industry he created, but I invite you to go to www.faithfamilyfriends.org to view his business in its full reality. Who's Felicia Briggs? She's named as a 51% owner. Your business is listed as a female, veteran, and minority owned. Is that a ruse to gain contracts? Then once rewarded, revert back to what you brag about now? Moving your production facility to Wyandotte County was wrong, and you know it. Hancock County lost 40 jobs. Taxpayer dollars were spent to help you purchase that building. Is that fair? As a commissioner, your job is to promote the economic growth of Hancock County, and you're paid by the taxpayers in Hancock County, not provide jobs elsewhere. Yogi Berra once said it's not over till it's over. Well, it's the bottom of the ninth. There are 2 outs, and you're up, and Harrington is pitching. Strike 1 is the Wizard of Oz, Frank Morgan scandal that you were involved with. Strike 2 is moving your manufacturing plant to Wyandotte County while serving as a commissioner. And strike 3 is using false or misleading minority, female, and veteran personnel to gain an unfair advantage over legitimate businesses. So strike 3, Brian, you're out. I'm John Harrington. I'm a proud Republican. I love Hancock County. I love America, and I want to be your county commissioner.
All right, well, that will bring us to the end. I'm sure there will be more said by both candidates on their various websites and social media presences following tonight's forum, so be sure to check that as well. I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and I'd like to thank UFTV Channel 20 for televising the forum, WFIN and WLFC for the live radio coverage, and of course the Courier online and in print for their work in covering this evening's festivities as well. And most of all, for those of you who have watched and listened, we hope that what you heard tonight maybe solidified your sense of the candidates. Remember, if you heard something tonight that clinched your support, well, then you can start voting now, as early voting is underway and Election Day is March 15th. And that will do it for tonight. I'm Doug Jenkins, wishing you good night from the University of Findlay.